All right, everyone, welcome to our week 11 live classroom. For this week, we are in the same chapter that we had our live classroom on last week in chapter 9 about functions. I felt like you guys did really well on your assignments and things last week, so nice work. For today, I wanted to go through a couple of the optional programming exercises at the end of the chapter. But before I do that, were there any questions from last week on any of the assignments, the Robbie the Robot stuff, anything that wasn't quite clear to you guys?
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Neither do I.
Well then, let's look at our options. All right, so we have exercise 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. All right, so for our first one, and I think we probably have time to go through probably close to all of these. So let's just start at the top and we'll just kind of go through them. So rewrite the number guessing game code found in review question 14 of chapter 8 so that it A is inside of a function with this header, number guess game, which is called when a user clicks a play button. B chooses, Shonda, welcome, glad you could make it.
Hi, thanks.
B chooses a different pseudo-random number between 1 and 100 each time it runs, and C counts the number of guesses the user takes to correctly guess the answer. All right, well, let me open up my text editor here. I'll go ahead and make a new window. And for this, let me go ahead and copy my template over. Well, for this one, actually, let's open up chapter 8. We'll just copy from that one. All right, so in here we have this function number guessing game, and we're going to kind of split this out a little bit so that we can do this, so that we can rewrite it so that we have a function number guess game when the user clicks on a button and implement these different things. So I'm going to paste this in here, and I'm going to save this as example1.html. And then I'm also going to copy my template. So let me copy my template, and then I'm going to move this function into the script tag of my template. All right, so this number guess game, we have a message. Let me blow this up a little bit so you guys can see it. So we have a message, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100, and the user tries to guess it. We have a hard-coded answer for that, which will always be 38. And then we have a nice little do-while loop that checks to see if the guess is greater than or lesser than the answer. And if it is the answer, then we'll go ahead and jump out of our do-while loop and say that it's correct. Okay. So going back to our prompt here. So it says rewrite it so that it's inside of the function, a function with the header number guess game. So that's good. And this function will get called when a user clicks a play button. All right, so down here, I'm going to remove that. We don't need an input, but I am going to call this function number guess game when the user clicks a button that says play. Okay, we don't need a paragraph, and I don't think we need an output div. Okay, so we just have a button that will call our number guess game function. All right. Any questions up to this point? Are you guys good here? Okay. Chooses a different pseudo-random number between 1 and 100 each time it runs. How could we do that? What do you guys think? How could we make a random number here? If I have no idea how to do it, how could I figure it out?
W3 schools.
W3 schools, okay. So I'm going to type into Google JavaScript random number. And W3 schools is the first non-advertisement thing that popped up. Oh, look at that. Math.random. Thank heavens for people who wrote code before we came along. So math.random returns a random number between 0 and 1. So if I hit this run button, you can see I have this nice very detailed decimal number that is between 0 and 1. Okay, so the user is going to be typing in a number between 1 and 100. All right, and my program here, if I use math.random, it will give me a number between 0 and 1. So a pretty easy way to make it between 1 and 100 would just be to multiply this by 100. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So instead of answer being 38, I'm going to say math.random, which will give us that random number. Okay, it'll look something like this, but I want it to be between 1 and 100. So I'm going to say times 100. Okay, but there are cases, okay, depending on how low this decimal number is. If, for example, I have 0.0001, my number, if I use math.random times 100, will be 0. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say times 101 to basically force it up out of 0. So no matter what the condition is, we won't have 0, but in this case, there would be some cases where it would be 101. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this entire thing into parentheses, and I'm going to say math.floor. Does anybody know what math.floor does?
Does it set the minimum limit?
It sort of. It will force it to round down. Okay, so let's say I multiply it by 101, and I had a number, and so my number ends up being like 100.8 or something like that, which would be possible if I multiply a number between 0 and 1 by 101. Okay, so I'll end up with like 100.8, which will round up to 101. Okay, but this math.floor will force it to round down. All right, and so this will give us a value between 1 and 100. Okay, so we have our answer. Let's go ahead and run this real quick. We copy the file path, and I'll paste it in here. Ooh, look at that beautiful play button. All right, I'm gonna hit F12. We don't have much going on our page over here. And I'm gonna put a breakpoint in right here so we can see how this is working. I'm gonna hit play. Ooh, good, we called our function number guess game. I know that because our breakpoint stopped here. If I hover over math.floor, you can see it recognizes this as a function. Same with math.random. Now, if I highlight this, it will execute the math.random function. So every time I highlight over this while I'm debugging, it will show a different value because every time I highlight over it, it'll run that function. So the random number we got this time is 0.58813. Okay, pretty good size number here. We'll multiply that by 101. Again, this is going to generate a new number. So now we have 49.7, and then we will force that to round down. Okay, and again, if I highlight over this again, then it'll change the random number again. But after all is said and done, we'll have our answer. It'll be rounded down to a whole number. So we get 61, and that is our answer. Okay. And each time we play this, we'll have a new answer because of this guy right here. All right. Any questions on our random number? Okay. Let's look then at what else we have to do for our program. Oh, come on, Chrome, you got this. All right, so button called play that calls number guess game, check. Chooses a different pseudo-random number between 1 and 100 every time it runs, check. And counts the number of guesses the user takes to correctly guess the answer. All right, so that's one thing that we haven't done. So right here in our code, let me go ahead and let this go. I'm going to remove this breakpoint and hit F8, and it'll let me play. I'll say 5. Tell me 5 is too low. I'll say 50, too low, 60, too low, 70, too high, 68, too high, 65. What was it? 62, 61? 61 is correct. Okay, but it doesn't tell me how many times I guessed it. So, any thoughts? How could we count this?
Wasn't that, sorry, your factor count last time?
Okay,
Is that
so
what you did?
let me make a new variable here. I'll say var, we'll say count. and I'll say equals 0. And then for every time we go through this, I'll just say count plus plus. Okay, so this will increment our count by 1 for every time our loop gets executed. Okay, so let's try this again. I'm going to refresh this and hit play. I'll say 50, 25, 37, 33, 30, 28, 26, 27. It says 27 is correct, but we didn't do anything with our count. All right, so in here, I'll go ahead and say message guess is correct plus count, and I'll say it took you count plus tries to guess it. Okay, that was one last time. Hit play, 50. Wow, what are the odds? Okay, I'd want to add a space right there between count and tries. All right, but there is our code. All right, so if we look at this, I think we got all of it. Okay, now I have one other question before we go on to our next program. How could we, if I wanted to test this guy right here, I wanted to ensure that every single time I'm getting a value between 1 and 100. Can you guys think of a good way to test that out a bunch of times? I could debug it, right? And I could like highlight over it over and over and over again, but that would be cumbersome. So just for kicks, let's make a new function here. I'll say function test random number. And in here, let's go ahead and make a little for loop. So I'm going to say for I equals 0 while I is less than 1,000. I plus plus. And then in here, well, let's go ahead and make a message. So I'll say var message equals an empty string. And then every time we get a random number, so I'm just going to copy this for a sec. Every time we get a random number, I'm going to say message plus equals answer plus break. Okay, so we'll get a nice list of all these random numbers coming up, approximately 1,000 of them. Okay, we'll add that, and then I'll just say document.getElement by ID. And I think I took out my div. Yeah, I did. So I'll make a div with an ID of test random. Okay, and then I'll put that up here. Inner HTML equals message. Okay, so I have an empty string. I will loop 1,000 times, running our little function right here every single time, and I'll add that to our message with a new line, and then we'll output that list of 1,000 numbers to our HTML. Okay. So instead of calling number guess game on our button, I'm going to call, well, you know what? I'll make a new button, and I'll say test random number, and I'll call the button that as well. All right. So let's run this. We have test random number here, and I'm going to hit the button, and look at that gorgeous list. Okay. Regardless of how many times I wanted to test this, I could copy this whole thing and easily put it into Excel or Google Sheets or anything like that, and I could just sort it. Okay, I can just paste them all right here. Just give her a sec. And then find my filter button, and then just sort from A to Z. And I could see how many of all these that I have, and I could check my highest number is 100. Okay, and my lowest was 100, and 0. My lowest is 0. Okay. Anything else you guys want to add, or any questions or comments you guys have? Okay, sweet. Well then, let's go to our next one. It looks like our next example that we could do is number 2. It says, create an HTML document which contains a text field, a button, and a div. Label the first text field Fahrenheit and put the text Celsius on the button. Write two functions with these headers. Do input output, Fahrenheit to Celsius. The first function do input output must be called by the onClick. All right, so let's stop there and let's do this real quick. So I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call this example2.html. For anybody using VS Code, a cool trick that you can do is type in exclamation mark and hit enter, and it will kind of give you a nice little template for you. If you're not using VS Code, then you can easily copy that template just from W3 Schools. I could just like copy this. So I have this template and I need two functions. So I'm just going to copy these. I need a script tag in here. Oops. Those. Okay, fun little hotkey for you. If I hold this and hit Control D, it'll select the next instance of the string that I have highlighted. So I'll just hit end to go to the end of those lines and open up my curly braces for those functions to be set up. All right, I'm going to tab these over so that I see that they're inside of my script tag. So I need a text field. So in here, I'll just say input type text. I'll probably need an ID, probably Fahrenheit. Okay. The first time I taught this class, I totally kept on misspelling Fahrenheit.
Colin, you plan on being here at work tomorrow?
Glad I'm past that.
The whole day?
All right.
Nothing to like so well.
So I have my input, and then I need a button. So I'll say button, and I'll say calculate Celsius. Okay, and then a div. All right, this div will need an ID. I'll just say output. All right, so check on all this. We have a text field, a button, and a div. Ooh, label the first text field Fahrenheit. Okay, and put text Celsius on the button. Okay, so I'll follow those instructions. Just for kicks, I'll show you guys something kind of cool. So if I type in placeholder, placeholder is an attribute that you can put on an input element in HTML. And I'll show you what this will do. So I'll just say Fahrenheit so you guys can see what it's doing. Okay, so I'm going to save this and I'm going to copy the file path and run it. See how it has this Fahrenheit right here? Okay, so a placeholder in HTML on an input will just add that temporary text, and I can type in here like 50 and it goes away. Okay, so I'll remove all of that. So it'll show, please enter a Fahrenheit number as my placeholder. So now if I refresh, it'll show that in here. All right, so we have our input and our label and our button. Let's see what else it wants us to do. The first function, do input output, must be called from the onClick. Let's do that. I'm going to copy this and say inside of my button, onClick, and paste that. Okay, so check on that one. And it must do the following. So do input output, we have to make it so it gets a temperature in Fahrenheit from the text field. Let's go ahead and do that. Any thoughts on how I can do it? I'll go ahead and start by saying var f equals document.getElement by ID. And I named our ID down here Fahrenheit dot value. Okay. Now, what will this give me? Will it give me a string or a number?
String.
Yep. So I'm going to say parse float in case the user wants to enter in a decimal value. And I'll put this entire input into that parse float function, and var f will end up being a nice float number. Okay. All right. So get a temperature in Fahrenheit from the text field, check. Call the second function. All right, and then store the value returned by Fahrenheit to Celsius in a variable and output that value returned by Fahrenheit to Celsius to the div for the user to see. All right, so a couple things that I'm going to do here. First off, I'm going to say return 5 so that in here, when I display a user or display a value for the user to see, I can see that Fahrenheit to Celsius is working. So to call Fahrenheit to Celsius, I'm just going to type in Fahrenheit to Celsius, and that will call it, okay? But I want to store that value returned by Fahrenheit to Celsius in a variable. So I'll say var c equals that, and whatever's returned here will get assigned to c, which right now is just 5, okay? And then output the value returned to the user to see. So I'll say document.get element by ID. We named it output down here. Inner HTML equals C. Okay. So do input output should be perfect at this point. According to these instructions, that's all it's asking us to do. So let's go ahead and run that. So regardless of what I type into here, we should be getting 5 showing up on the page, okay? Because right now I call Fahrenheit to Celsius, I assign that to C, and I print C to the page, and Fahrenheit to Celsius is just returning 5. So if I hit our button, you can see 5 pops up there, all right? So now do input output is ready to rock. It's doing everything it has to do. And so let's go back into Fahrenheit to Celsius to see what it's going to do. Takes a temperature in Fahrenheit as a parameter, okay? So my function header is ready to go here. All I have to do to pass in a parameter here is just type in a variable here. Now I could type in like 50.5 and then pass in 50.5 degrees, and that would be completely legit, all right? But I'm getting the input from the user, so I'm just going to pass in F right there, because that's what we assigned that user value to, and then we'll get 5 back, okay? So again, if I ran this program right now, nothing would change, even though I'm passing in whatever number the user typed in, because I'm not doing anything with Fahrenheit inside of here. So take a temperature in Fahrenheit as a parameter, check. Calculate the corresponding Celsius temperature, and then return that Celsius temperature. So I'm going to go over to my old pal Google and say Fahrenheit to Celsius. Let's see what she says. Okay, looks like 32 degrees Fahrenheit minus 32 times 5/9 equals 0 degrees Celsius. So I take my Fahrenheit value and I say F minus 32. Those are in parentheses, so I'm going to put mine in parentheses. Oh, it's named far down here. Okay, so my Fahrenheit temperature minus 32 times 5/9. So I'm going to say times 5 divided by 9. Okay, and that should return for me my Celsius value. Okay, so I'm going to try this. So if I type in 50, it says 10. I'm going to come over here first thing and test it out. 10, good, that's a good sign. All right, and then I type in like 120, calculate, it says 48.888889. Wait, what number did I type in? 120. Okay, 120, 48.8889. Okay, so it looks like our function's working pretty well. The last thing I would try, I'd also want to do a negative number just to cover my bases. Okay, and then I would check it over here. Negative 31. Yep. Okay, let's see if it had any other requirements. I think that was it. So the second function must not gather any input from the user, which it didn't. Okay, so here's a question for you guys. Why might I want to do this? Okay, I used a single line of code to calculate my Celsius value. I could have written this entire thing in a single line of code inside of do input output. So what's the point of making a new function called Fahrenheit to Celsius?
Does it make the code reusable?
Yeah, so now if at any point in my program, if I have to calculate this, I can call a function called Fahrenheit to Celsius, and it will just pop out a Celsius value. And I can use it as many times as I want. If the user types in 1,000 numbers, I can loop through it, call Fahrenheit to Celsius. If I need to call it in other places in my code, I can. and then I just have this single mathematical equation used once in my code, but this function can get called a billion times anywhere I want it to. So it makes it really reusable. Another thing is that it makes the functions in and of themselves more cohesive. So do input output will do a very specific task. It will get the input from the user and output something to the user and kind of act as a driver for our program. And then any other calculations or anything that I have to do can be handled by other functions to make them more modular, more reusable, and more concise in their functionality. No pun intended. Okay. All right, any questions on this one?
Why would you put far instead of the F in the
Great
second
question.
function?
So remember right here, I said that I could type in like 50.5?
Yeah.
I can put anything in here as a parameter, okay?
Mhm.
But in here, this is basically going to be a variable name. And I'm assigning that variable a value that I pass in. So whatever I pass in, whether I pass in 50.5 or 20 or a variable that contains a number, whatever I pass in the scope of this new function, it needs a name so that I can reference it. And so here I could say Fahrenheit number, and that would work just as fine. But then I would have to use that variable name inside of this function.
Yeah, so why don't you just use F both times instead of F and Fahrenheit?
I could. Yeah, I totally could.
Okay.
The reason why I didn't was because up here I named it F because that's what made sense to me and was concise and clear enough. But then in here, it said to use this function header.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why I did it. But if you were writing your own program, you could totally do it however you wanted it to do it.
Cool. 'Cause I would want to do it the same.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Another thing too, in talking about like the reusability of functions, it is very possible that in different places of my code, if I had a large piece of code that I'm working with, I might call it in different places by different names. So if up here I had Fahrenheit instead, and I could pass in Fahrenheit, but this wouldn't be influenced by that, okay? Or if I typed in, you know, like the number 20, again, in here it'd just be F. And so I could reuse this any way that I wanted to, and I could call it multiple ways anywhere inside of my code. So, but in this case, we're only calling it once, and so this makes sense to me as well, just leaving it the same across.
That sounds good.
Hey, any other questions or comments on this one? Okay, notice how much I used Google on this, all right? Both to find the formula and also to test it extensively once I got it, all right? So anytime you have math, whether it be in this class or in other classes, check them, check your answers as much as possible. Gets a little bit tricky when you're going into like compound interest and things like that, that isn't quite as easily calculated, but usually you can find a decent calculator on some website. But all right, looking at this, I think our next exercise that we can do is exercise 4. Create an HTML document which contains 2 text fields, a button and a div. Label the first one temperature, second one relative humidity, and put the text heat index on the button. Right, 2 functions. So this is an example of something that might not be as easily Googleable, but we'll figure it out. So I'm going to copy all this since it already has quite a bit of the stuff that we need, like text fields and stuff. So I'm just going to say example 4.html. All right, and then in here, we need 2 text fields, a button and a div. So I'm just going to copy that. Label the first text field temperature. Okay, and I'll go ahead and call this temperature as well. Label the second one relative humidity. And I'll name this ID just humidity. Okay. And put the text heat index on the button. Okay, do input output is still getting called by the button, so I'll leave that the way it is. But I'm gonna change up this stuff. So we're getting a temperature. So I'm gonna put that inside my ID, and I'll just put a T there for that. So it gets a temperature from the first text field, gets a relative humidity from the second one. So I'm going to copy this line of code, and I'm still going to parse it, but this one we named humidity, and I'll just name this H. Okay. So we have temperature being retrieved, relative humidity being retrieved. Call the second function heat index. Okay, so now we're changing things up. I'm going to take that out for now. And I'm going to delete this. So we call heat index, store the value returned from heat index in a variable. I'll just call this heat index. I'm assuming it's going to return a heat index. And then output the value returned by heat index to the div for the user to see. And then we'll just put this right there. All right. Our input currently has a placeholder saying, please enter a Fahrenheit number. So right here, I'm just going to say, please enter a temperature. And for this one, I'll say, please enter a humidity value. Okay. So I'm going to run this just to make sure that it doesn't look all silly. Example 4 is what we named it. Okay. So we have a temperature, relative humidity. I'm kind of going out of bounds here a little bit, but how can I make this look a little bit prettier? Any ideas on how I could make these inputs line up? This is outside of JavaScript.
You could justify them to the right.
Okay, yeah, so that's one option. So let's do that. So I have these inputs. So I have temperature and relative humidity. So in here, I can add a style tag that might look something like this. Okay, and I could say, you know, float or whatever. I could add an inline style is what that's called. Or up in here, I could say style. And I could just isolate all inputs. Okay. And if I did that, I could say float left. Okay. So if I run this now, you can see that changed things a little bit. Okay. Let's try one other thing. So right here, this will change it. The reason why it's looking funky like that is because of these breaks. Okay. One easy way to do it, because if I did this, I could make a div and then have the labels on one side and the inputs be on the other side. And I could restrict the size of that div, and which would make it show and control where those inputs end up. An easier way to do this, though, would be to make a table. So I'd have a table. Remember, for a table, I can have rows, which are these TRs, and then cells within those rows. Okay, so I could have temperature inside of one cell. And then for the next one, I could have this input. Okay, and then if I did the same thing again, I could have relative humidity in our next row. And then I could have our next input in the next cell of that row. Then I can take those breaks out. Then if I run this, you can see it looks really nice, just like that. Okay. This might seem kind of cumbersome using a table. If you have any questions on how to use a table, W3 Schools is a great place to go. I can just say table, and wow, that's not helpful. Let's see, HTML tables, and it'll teach you like how to style it differently and like style every other row and different things like that. But you can see we have our table, rows. This is for a table header, cells inside of each row. And so this is a nice simple way anytime you have two things that you want to align side by side. But yes, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, a lot of different ways. This is just one simple way. In this case, we're not even using any CSS. I wouldn't even need this. This is just using HTML. But, okay, let's go back and see what else we need to do. So I need a function called heat index. And we're going to call that. Looks like we're going to need two parameters. So I'm going to type in T and H, which is what we named these two variables typed in from the user, and we'll pass those into heat index. And then we'll display heat index on the page. So right here, I'm just going to say return 5. and I'm gonna test this out and run it, make sure that the bare bones of my program are working. So if I type in 50 and 20 and, ooh, look at that, it's not running. And hit F12, see why not. Heat index is not a function. That's interesting. Okay, heat index is declared right here. Okay, let's try to put it up there beforehand. And let's refresh. Hit our button. Still says heat index is not a function. All right, let's see what's going on here. So heat index has two parameters. Passing in two parameters there. Those are the only places we're calling it. Let's see here. Anyone see the error that I'm missing? Let's open this up, heat index. That's weird, it looks like it's right there. Let's try to refresh one more time. Hit my button. And yeah, it doesn't see what heat index is. Oh, it's probably because I named this the same thing. Yep, that would do it. Okay, so because I'm saying var heat index right here, it's like basically emptying out this variable name. Heat index is just a variable name, but the data type of that variable is a function. And so maybe instead I'll name this heat index value. All right, let's refresh this. Take these breakpoints out, hit our button, and okay, well, that's a little bit of progress. It should have just returned 5. There's something funky going on here. All right. I'm going to put this back to where it was. We don't need it up there. I'm going to kind of strip this out just a little bit. So we have our temperature, humidity, a call heat index. I'm going to change these names. I'm going to say temperature and humidity. We'll call heat index, which will pass in those two values, and we'll return 5. Oh, that's why. So heat index, again, is a variable name. And so instead of printing out heat index value, it was printing up the entire function, which is why I did that. All right. So let's refresh this, hit our button. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad we checked all that because it's easier to test things when you have less code. So now we know that this is working, okay, same way as it did in our last program. And now we just have to work on heat index and see what we have to do with that. Any questions on anything up till now? Okay. So the first function does all this, gets the temperature, gets the relative humidity, calls heat index, stores that value, and outputs it for the user. Okay, so we're done with do input output. Second function takes a temperature in Fahrenheit as a parameter, check. Takes a relative humidity between 0 and 100% as a parameter, check. We don't have any error checking to make sure it's between 0 and 100. Calculate the heat index as a temperature in Fahrenheit and return that heat index. Whoa, and there's our function for that. Wow, it just kind of kept on going there. So let's do this. Let me blow this up just a little bit. All right. So for heat index, I'm just going to say var heat index equals, I'm going to put negative 42.379 plus, I'm going to cheat and copy that number. Okay. And then T. T is the air temperature in Fahrenheit. Okay. So I have temp F. So I'm going to say times temp F. Okay. And then plus, we have this number times R. R is the relative humidity, okay, which we named humid. Okay. So we have negative 4.42.379 plus this times temp F plus this times humid. Okay. Next thing, we need to subtract this. I'm just going to say minus that times TR. Am I seeing that right? Yeah. So I'm going to say times temp times humid. Okay. Just to make this more clear, I'm going to name these T and R for now. Okay, just so I can kind of read alongside this better. Okay, so times T times R minus, and let's see what's going on here. So we have a big old decimal number times T squared. Okay, so I'm going to say minus that number. Okay, and then times T times T. That'll give us T squared. Okay, and then I'm going to hit enter just to kind of space this out a little bit. Minus this guy. Aren't you guys glad you didn't have this for your assignment? Times R, and then plus, we'll worry about order of operations and stuff here in a little bit, you guys. Plus that times T squared times R. Okay. Plus this guy times T times R minus that number times T times R times R. Whew, need a nap. Okay, so we have all of our numbers here and all of our values. Now we just have to make sure that these are all grouped properly. With something massive like this, what I would do is put parentheses anytime something is supposed. So right here, I'm supposing that T is going to be multiplied by and only by 2.04901523. So right here inside of my program, I'm going to highlight this and put some parentheses. Okay, so that's there. Next one is this. So I'm going to highlight this and put in a left parenthesis, which will automatically put my closing parenthesis there. Minus that. So those will all get multiplied together. So I'll put parentheses around those. Minus this. I'm going to put that on a new line. And that. And that. Okay. So plus 10 minus 0.22 times TR. This needs to be inside of parentheses to make sure that all of that gets calculated together. Minus 0 times R squared. So I'm going to put that in parentheses. Plus this one times T squared times R. Put that into parentheses. And then T times R squared. Put this into parentheses. And then our last one needs to go in parentheses also. All right. Once all of our multiplication is out of the way, this will just happen one step at a time. Okay, so we have our negative 42 plus this, plus that, minus this, minus that, minus this. Okay, and we should be good to go. Okay, and then I'll just return our heat index variable. All right. Except again, heat index is already named here, so I'm just going to call this, what did they call it here? I. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Should we try running it? Any questions? Okay, well, let's try running it. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this. And I'm going to enter a temperature and then a relative humidity. It expected a 0 to 100% value. So I'm going to say 0.5 and type in my heat index, and nothing happened. That's a bummer. So F12, heat index is not defined. What is going on here? Oh, I renamed this to heat index. All right, let's come back here, refresh, 50.5. And apparently our heat index is 43.9. Now, I'm not much of a weatherman. I have no idea what that means. Does anybody know what that means?
No idea.
Okay, it's probably what it feels like, maybe what the temperature feels like, given if we had 50% humidity and the temperature was 50 outside. Because I'm pretty sure like the colder it is, the higher the impact humidity has. So there just dropped like 14 degrees. But if it was like 110 degrees at 50% humidity, oh, interesting. I have no idea. So I would want to check this. I would type in relative humidity. Look at that calculator. That's awesome. All right. Well, I guess let's try this first one. Okay. And I'm not gonna, I just realized what time it was. I think we still have a couple left that we can do. So I'm gonna skip over this. But the main thing I wanted to show you here was how I would break up this math. Okay. You can add all these new lines. I didn't do anything to make this allowed or anything like that. But this is just kind of what made sense to me to show me each step. And then I made sure to put all of my multiplication in parentheses just to force it to only be multiplied by those values. So if you want to try this on your own, feel free. But yeah, is everyone okay if I go on to the next program?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, our next one is number 5. Shows a triangular prism. The volume of a triangular prism can be calculated by multiplying the area of the triangular face by the length of the prism. That makes sense. All right. So triangle area times length equals volume. And we have 3 functions here. So let me copy all of this into a new file. And I will name this example5.html. Excuse me. So we need a do input output. We don't need a heat index. That is okay with me. So we will add a prism volume. Let me change this actually. I'm going to delete all that. So we have a prism volume function and we need a triangle area function. This is like function inception. All right. So do input output takes no parameters. It's called on the on click, gets 4 numbers from the user, calls the prism volume function, and displays the result to the user. So let me blow this up a little bit. So we need 4 volumes from the user. Width, depth, wait, that's the wrong one. Okay, so we need A, B, C, and length. So in here, I'll go ahead and just leave this table the way it is. I'll just say side A, and then I'll just name this ID A, and side B, B. I'm going to take the placeholders out. Hope no one's offended. Add another row. I'm going to do this for C. Oops. Then I'll add another row for prism length. Okay, so I have my 4 inputs here. They should show up nicely in the table. And then do input output is calling, or our button is calling that. It looks like our button though, what does our button need to say? I'll just say calculate until we see otherwise. Calculate, we go up into do input output, and I'm going to delete that. We have side A, Control C, Control V to copy the new line. This next one will be B, and C, and then length. All right, so we have our 4 inputs coming in, and then we need to call prism volume. All right, we need to pass in A, B, C, and length. And I'll just name this prism, calculated prism volume. Okay. All right. Let's run this real quick, make sure that it's working for us. Example 5. Ooh, that's pretty. 5, 5, 5, 16, calculate. Undefined, that's okay, because prism volume isn't returning anything. So this came up as undefined and printed undefined. All right, let's look at our program here. Okay, gets 4 numbers from the user, calls prism volume and displays the result. So prism volume takes 4 parameters, calls triangle area. So let's go ahead and call triangle area. Boom, we need to pass in some parameters, I guess. Okay, A, B, and C. Computes the volume of a prism and then returns the volume. So I'm going to return triangle area times length. Whoops. Length times, there we go. Okay, right, because prism volume is just the length times the triangle area. So once we get our triangle area, we should be good to go. Third function takes 3 parameters, computes the area of a triangle, returns the area. Ooh, triangle area. There's a triangle area function in this chapter. Let me just go there real quick. Okay. So it looks like it is the square root of s times all of that. Okay, A, B, and C are the lengths of the 3 sides of the triangle, and s is the semi-perimeter of the triangle defined by that. Well, let's do that real quick then. So I'm going to say var s equals A plus B plus C, all in parentheses, divided by 2. So there's s, and then I'll go ahead and return math.square root, and we're getting the square root of s times s minus a times s minus b times s minus c. Okay, let's look at this. So we have s, a plus b plus c divided by 2. Good. And then the square root of s times s minus a times s minus b times s minus c. Okay, any objections? I think we should be good. Let's run this. So if my sides were 5, 5, 5, and the length was 10, we get 108. Okay, again, I'd want to check that, but we got 5 minutes left to do our next program. So let's blitz this. Looks like our next one is number 6. All right, just a very basic house. We are computing the volume of this house. Here's the functions on how we do it. Oh, good, we get to use our triangle area that we made. Ooh, and our volume area, or triangle volume. Okay, 5 functions. All right, guys, bear with me. Any questions while I'm copying this? Example 6. So we need width, depth, height, and sweep. Okay, so in here, instead of side A, I'm going to say width, depth, height, and sweep. All right, I'm going to hold Control and copy all of these. And I'm going to select ID, hit Control D to select the next instance of all those, paste, and make them lowercase with Control KL. All right, so we have our inputs. I'm going to copy these IDs, come up into here, get element by ID, paste those. We'll blow that up so it's easier to see what's going on. And then place those. Okay, so we have our width, depth, height, and sweep. Let's check to see what we're going to call first. So do input output takes no parameters, gets 4 numbers from the user, calls house volume. Okay, so I'm going to copy that and paste it there. Displays the house volume to the user. Okay, so I'm going to call house volume. I'll say calculated house volume and display that to the user. And then inside of here, I need to pass in our width, depth, height, and sweep. Okay, so this function should be good to go. Let's work out house volume. Takes 4 parameters, calls the living volume, calls the roof volume, and computes the house volume by adding the living volume and the roof volume and returns that. Okay, so apparently we're going to have a living volume and roof volume. So I'm going to say living volume plus roof volume. Okay, so these will both return numbers. I'll add those together to get the total house volume, and we'll return that into calculated house volume and output it. So we need a living volume function. Let's go ahead and make that. And we need a roof volume function. All right, and there's our 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, third function takes 3 parameters, computes and returns the volume of the living space. That is this rectangular prism. Okay, ooh, and they give us a little function. Width times depth times height. Okay, so I'm going to copy this so that we're clear with our names on what we're passing in here. And then living volume needs width, depth, and height. So I'm going to copy these and pass those into living volume and retrieve them into living volume. And I'm going to return, instead of having commas, I'm going to multiply them all by each other. Okay, so living volume will return width times depth times height. Okay, that looks right. Takes 3 parameters, times the living space. Okay, fourth function, roof volume, takes 3 parameters. Let's see what they are. Triangle area and width. Okay, so in our last program, we had prism volume and triangle area. So our roof volume is a triangular prism. Okay, but 2 of the sides of the triangle are going to be the same. They're going to be sweep. So what I'm going to do for roof volume, we need, let's see here, roof volume takes 3 parameters. Okay, it's going to need sweep, width, and depth. Okay, so the depth, all right, so sweep, width, and depth. Actually, that's a little bit confusing. I'm going to put this over here because the sweep and the depth are for the triangle, for our triangle area, and we'll have our width for the triangular prism. Okay, so for this, I'll say return triangle area times width. Okay, just like we did with our triangular prism volume, we have the triangle area times the length, in this case, the width. And then triangle area, all we have to do is pass in sweep, sweep, and depth, and then we can just reuse this function. Okay, that actually might be it. Let's look over here. Triangle area, we already did. Roof volume, return triangle area times width, which we did. Okay, am I missing anything, you guys? Let's run this. Cross our fingers. All right, so let's say our width is, let me look at our little picture here. All right, we'll say our width is 38 feet, our depth is 22, height is 12, and our sweep is 8. Not a number, triangle error, let's try 6. 10. All right, let's see what's going on here. Because I know that if we don't have good numbers for the sweep with the triangle, sometimes you can have like an impossible triangle. So I'm going to put a breakpoint inside of each one of these to see where that not a number value is coming from. So width, depth, height, sweep, all these values are coming in good. So we're good up to that point. I'll move this breakpoint down to there. These values are being passed in. Okay, so for living volume, that's going to be 10,000. Okay. Roof volume, ooh, sweep, depth, and width. Well, those being undefined, that would definitely give us a not a number error. So where are we calling roof volume? Right here. Let's see what roof volume needs. It needs triangle area and width. Okay. So for roof volume, it looks like we needed sweep, depth, and width. I'll just paste those into here since we're using the same names everywhere. All right, I'm going to turn off my breakpoints, hit F8, and refresh. 38, 22, 12, and we'll say 8. Not a number again. Let's turn on these breakpoints again. All right, roof volume, sweep, depth, width, good. So let's see what our triangle area, if I highlight over this, I'll see what that'll compute for us. Not a number. So it is our triangle area because width is fine. Okay, well, we already know our triangle area function works because we've used it before and we haven't changed it. But we got an error going on here. So we need to make sure that we have, I'm going to take these breakpoints off, a good triangle. So our depth is 22, which is this guy right here. So that makes sense. Because if I have a depth of 22 and I have two sides of a triangle that are going to be 8 each, I'm going to have an incomplete triangle. So I was using the height for that. So I'm going to say like 15, calculate, and there we have a good number. Okay. Again, we could check this with the calculator, but any questions on the code? Sorry, I like flew through that, you guys. I totally lost track of time, but I'm glad we made it through all of them. But do you guys have any questions on any one of these programs?
I have a question real quick. I don't know if you covered it already, but what helps you choose for these live classrooms, whether you're going to use Visual Studio Code or Sublime?
I use both a lot, actually. And because of that, so let me open up Sublime real quick. Oh, I can't open it right now. But because of that, I ended up going into Visual Studio Code and I went into my settings, or not into my settings, into my keyboard shortcuts, and I made sure that the keyboard shortcuts that I use match exactly what they are in Sublime. So all the keyboard shortcuts that I showed you guys today are actually Sublime keyboard shortcuts that I made match in here. But I use both a lot. As far as their functionality goes, they, like everything that I've shown you guys, they do the exact same thing. I didn't touch any of this stuff on the side, which is unique to Visual Studio Code. But everything that I've showed you guys, it would have been the exact same thing in Sublime. But yeah, as far as you guys go, I would just say, if you find a text editor that you like, just stick with it. I use both because I'm slowly realizing that there's nothing that Sublime can do that Visual Studio Code can't do. One thing that I like about Sublime is that it's a little bit more lightweight. There's more stuff going on inside of Visual Studio Code, which is why I've started using it more. Because inside of Sublime, you can install all sorts of extensions and things like that, but it's a little bit more cumbersome. Inside of Visual Studio Code, I can just click on this guy and I can search for any extensions that I want to. If I wanted something for like SQL or something like that, there's a billion extensions in here and all I have to do is just hit install, you know? And so that's why I started using Visual Studio Code a little bit more. But for this class, everything that we've done here, you know, it's everything that I've done, that I've showed you today, it would be the exact same thing in Sublime. So,
Cool. Okay.
yeah. Okay, good question. Any other questions about the programs, editors, the class? Okay. There are, so just as a side note, there are some pretty cool things if I type in like color picker. So this is kind of a cool one. If I had, so like right here, it shows, you know, if I'm going to add any style or anything like that, it would actually have a color picker that I could like choose from instead of like typing in a number. And that would be just like right here inside my text editor, you know, or color highlight. If I wanted like a nice little box showing me what color it was, you know, so these are like CSS ones, but there are like JavaScript ones as well that will do like error checking for you or like help you type out stuff quicker. Like JavaScript snippet pack, you can like see how many people have used it, what the ratings are. So there's a lot of different expansions. And all these things, like I said, you can use with Sublime too. If I go into Sublime extension, that's it, package control. I can come into here and I can search for all sorts of stuff. I could say color picker. And you see there's like a color picker, a color highlighter, really similar to VS Code. And so you can't go wrong. I love both of these programs. And so, but it's whatever you're more comfortable with and whatever is easier for you to use. So. All right. Well, you guys, I think I'm going to zip up these 5 examples and I'll send them out to the class so that you guys have them if you want to use them, or if you want to run the debugger on them, or test them, or whatever you want. So I will send those out. But before I let you guys go, are there any other questions or anything else that I can help you guys with? All right. Well then, to the 3 of you that came, thank you guys for coming. I enjoyed working with you guys. And I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week, a great Thanksgiving. I'm sorry that there are assignments due this weekend. Try to get them done early so that you can have an enjoyable weekend. But yeah, have a great weekend and happy Thanksgiving to you all.
Thanks. Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, thanks, Vance. See you guys.